口译战第105集现在开始。
Or, as we say in English, episode 105 of the Interpretation Station is called to order. Thanks very much. So we've got a new chairman today. How are you, Zoe?
Good, good, feeling great. I feel like I'm the permanent representative of China now.
Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of the Interpretation Station. Yes, as you can tell, we have Zoe with us today, which means it's going to be an episode for you Chinese speakers today. And we've got something very special for you today. You will recall in our last episode that me and Zoe filmed a month or so ago, we took a deep dive, as they like to say at the UN, we took a deep dive through the UN Charter. Well, I've rustled up another one of the big UN documents for you for today's episode, and that is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So in my work here in Geneva, this is where, at the UN in Geneva, this is where all the big human rights issues are discussed in general. It's where all the big human rights committees are. And really, the Universal Human Rights Declaration is kind of the bedrock for all of that. Just tell us, Zoe, Universal Human Rights Declaration in Chinese, how do we say that?
世界人权宣言.
Okay. Sometimes you'll also hear the acronym in English, UHRD, okay, the Universal Human Rights Declaration. So like I say, it's sort of like the bedrock for all the big, if you consider the UHRD down here, and from that spring things like the covenants, for example, okay, the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights, or the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Also from that bedrock of the Universal Human Rights Declaration, you have spring all these other committees, okay, committees against torture, committees against enforced disappearance. So it's a really, really important text that if you have ambitions, let's say, of working at the UN or working in international organizations, having a good knowledge of the Universal Human Rights Declaration is really going to help you a lot, both in terms of simply of vocabulary, knowing the sort of vocabulary they use in these kinds of meetings, and also just in terms of general knowledge, knowing, this is, it's part of international law. National courts, they cite provisions of the Universal Human Rights Declaration in rulings that are delivered at a national level. So it's a really integral part of the whole framework of international law. Zoe, what do you know about the Universal Human Rights Declaration? Much?
No.
Have you run into it much so far in your sort of fledgling career?
Not really, to be honest. Yeah, I've encountered some terms like right to X, right to Y, and that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. So those rights, lots of those spring from this document.
Yeah.
Now, what I found interesting when me and Zoe did the UN Charter in the last episode, one thing I didn't know, and Zoe had to enlighten me on this, was that the UN Charter, the Chinese version, is written in the Taiwanese flavor of Chinese.
Yep.
And Zoe informs me, well, you can again tell the audience, Zoe.
Yeah, so I think the translation of the Human Rights Declaration is again in the Taiwanese flavor of Chinese, as the declaration was drafted and adopted in 1948.
The 10th of December 1948
Yes.
It was adopted.
Yeah, 1948. So at that time, the ROC was in the UN, not the PRC. So there are some phrases in the translation that are not very commonly used in mainland China, and you probably won't hear that in the UN, at least, I mean, maybe by interpreters, because I think most of the Chinese interpreters in the UN are from the mainland at the moment. That's what I believe. Yeah.
I would assume, I think they are.
Yeah, I
think
would kind of
you're
assume
right.
that. Yeah, and for terms that I found a bit weird, I double checked it on the UN terms website to get the kind of the mainland version. Yeah, so I'll include that in the brackets like what I did
That's
last
excellent.
time.
Like you did, so you'll see
Yeah,
you'll basically see the English, you will see the actual original Chinese as it features in the declaration, and then you will also see Zoe's sort of version in Mandarin, sort of the newer version.
yeah, but I didn't make them up. Yeah, to be
Yeah, no, no,
honest.
right,
Yeah, I
right,
didn't
right.
make them up. Yeah, I just still double check them. Yeah, on the
So
website.
I suppose then all documents, right, that were in Chinese that were drafted up until 71
71, I think.
would
Would
all have been in the
Yeah, would
Chinese,
kind of
whereas the
have that kind of
article
flavor. Yeah.
71 would have been in Mandarin, right? That's
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, well, without any further ado, we're going to take. So me and Zoe are going to take you through it, looking at
Yeah.
what I deem to be the most useful parts of that declaration to know. I mean, it's not as long as nowhere near as long as the charter. You know, it's made up. The declaration is made up of 30 articles, but nevertheless, it's useful. You know, you can't really memorize it all, so it's useful for you guys to know what are the actual most important parts of that, which phrases in the declaration are the ones that are most cited in meetings at the UN, which articles are the ones that are most frequently referred to. That's what and in what context are they used as well. That's what I hope to sort of shed some light on for all you Chinese Mandarin speakers out there. So we will now, me and Zoe are now going to share the screen, and you will see the original English version appear up on the screen, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I'll just give you a quick, this is the little booklet that I stole from work the other day. You can see that. I'll just give the introduction, it's worth knowing. On December the 10th of December 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was proclaimed and adopted by the General Assembly. The extraordinary vision and determination of the drafters produced a document for the first time set out universal human rights for all people in an individual context. Now available in more than 360 languages, the Declaration is the most translated document in the world. Didn't know that.
Yeah, I thought it was the Bible.
Bible.
Yeah.
Apparently not. A testament to its universal nature and reach. It has inspired the constitutions of many newly independent states and many new democracies. It has become a yardstick, good word that, by the way, yardstick, synonym, benchmark. How do you say that in Chinese?
I would say 标准. Yeah.
Okay, remember that this is a pair
Yeah,
of
different
synonyms,
translations.
yardstick
Yeah.
and benchmark, by which we measure respect for what we know or should know as right and wrong. It is our duty to ensure that these rights are a living reality, that they are known, understood, and enjoyed by everyone, everywhere. It is often those who most need their human rights protected who also need to be informed that the Declaration exists and that it exists for them. The 60th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration is an occasion, so I guess this was written in 2018, for all of us to recommit to the vision of the Declaration. It remains as relevant today as it was on the day it was adopted. I hope you will make it part of your life. Okay, there we go. So we're going to move straight to the nitty gritty, okay? And so as with all these declarations, all these documents, you have the preamble. Now my advice with the UN Charter when we did that last, that's one thing you should, if you, as I say, if you're having to do an exam or something like that, the UN, or if you're going to have your first job there, it's always good to actually know the preamble, especially the preamble to the UN Charter. That is a very, that's really important. That I would memorize, I would try and learn by heart the preamble to the UN Charter. Now, the preamble to this, it's quite long. But, I don't know if you need to learn it by heart. I guess it would help. But anyway, I have highlighted here for you what I deem as the most important parts. You'll see those in blue. So here we have, yes, we talk about the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights. So this is something they will often refer to in meetings, this idea of equal and inalienable rights. Tell me how they say that in Chinese, Zoe.
So in Chinese, it's 固有尊严及其平等的和不移的权利的承 sorry, it's no 承认，承认 is the recognition 的权利。So I have this phrase in brackets, so that's for inalienable. It's translated as 不移 in the original, but nowadays you're going to hear 不可剥夺. That's kind of the set translation for inalienable if it's related to rights. Yeah.
That's a very important one, the idea of
Yeah,
inalienable
it's
rights.
really important. Yeah.
Because they'll talk about that again in these human rights committees and the various treaty bodies. That's the important one I should have said before. Treaty bodies, we say, how do we say treaty bodies in Chinese?
So it's 条约机构 or 人权条约机构. Yeah.
Okay, so make sure you guys that you know that you're familiar with the treaty bodies. Okay, you ever get an exam and you get stuff that comes from Geneva, there's a pretty high likelihood that the treaty bodies will get referenced. Also, I was going to say with inalienable rights, there's other expressions you see that another sort of good synonyms to be at least familiar with, to recognize when they talk about non-derogable rights is something they'll talk about, non-negotiable rights. So just remember those three sort of words. You know, if you're going into English, you probably only need to know one of them, okay? But just remember, if you hear the idea of non-derogable, non-negotiable, they're pretty similar in meaning, okay?
Right.
Okay, let's move to the second paragraph. Okay, this outraged the conscience of mankind. How do we say that in Chinese?
So the Chinese translation is slightly different. It's 玷污了人类的良心. So outrage is translated as 玷污, which is contaminated if it's a direct translation. But then, I mean, the English is kind of a metaphor. So the Chinese adopts a different metaphor that fits better in Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this gets said sometimes. For example, you know, if they're talking about crimes that were committed, let's say, and the thing is, let's say the Russians say it, okay? So let's say the Russians that maybe are talking about things that took place in World War II and the atrocities committed there, which outraged the conscience of mankind. So don't forget that, you know, the Russians are going to say it, and it's going to get, I'm going to interpret into English from Russian, and then you guys in the Chinese booth are going to have to interpret what I say. So, you know, you got to remember that this could come from any direction.
Yeah.
That's the sort of context where you might hear something about outraging the conscience of mankind. I have certainly heard it a few times. Then we have, okay, some of these basic freedoms, okay, freedom of speech and belief, that's very important. Freedom of fear and want, okay, I haven't heard that as much, although it's always useful to remember if you hear want, it's maybe a bit of a non-native English speakers might be initially thrown by it. Freedom from want. What does that mean? I mean, it's freedom of from not being denied something, of having what you need, especially like in terms of just having something to eat or being able to fulfill your basic needs. Okay, freedom from want. How do you say that in Chinese?
So the two freedoms, freedom of speech and belief is 言论和信仰自由. Freedom from fear and want, 免于恐惧和匮乏. So just one difference in the character. So in Taiwanese Chinese, I guess they say 免于, but in mainland we say 免. I mean, pronunciation is the same, but the character is different. Yeah, just one slight difference. Yeah.
As a non-native English speaker, when the first time you'd have heard freedom from want, would that have confused you?
Not really for me, because I did English literature, like for my undergrad, so I know want is like lacking. Yeah, that's kind of the default definition if you see want in literature. Yeah, especially like older literature. Yeah.
So
yeah.
You get it in literature.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. Okay, I think we're still in the preamble here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's another phrase that you will often hear: the dignity and worth of the human person. Now, it might sound a bit strange, the human person.
Yeah.
And okay, man, I'll be straight with. I mean, I'll be straight with you. So I don't think I know. I can't remember when I looked at the Human Rights Declaration the first time. It was quite a few years into my career. I hadn't looked at it before, and this I noticed the human person. To be honest, it sounds a little bit odd in English, but that is the official wording they use. You'll hear that in Spanish, la dignidad de la persona humana. And I
Okay.
always thought I would that sort of thing into English. I was originally putting as just saying human dignity. But no,
Yeah.
in the actual original wording, it's the dignity and worth of the human person. So how do they
Okay.
put that in Chinese?
Um, so interestingly, the Chinese is actually human dignity, 人格尊严
Okay.
和价值. Yeah. I mean, if this is an if construction, then in Chinese you need to invert it. You need to put it at the front.
Okay.
And yeah, it's just 人格尊严. It's not 人类尊严. Yeah, this is
Okay.
what it is, I guess. Yeah. What about in French? Do they say of the human person as well?
I think they
Like
do.
in
I think la personne
Spanish.
humaine, de l'être humain, I think it is la dignité et valeur de l'être humain. So yeah, so don't say the human being, it's the human person.
Yeah, yeah. I've only heard like
Yeah, you get
natural person.
human dignity and human worth, but it's just
Mm,
interesting that in the original, they say the human person. So
yeah,
that always might impress someone if you. It's always good to have that exact wording for these sort of notions.
yeah.
Okay, then we go down here. Okay, so universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms. So for me here, what's interesting is the use of observance. Often, like when I work, it's always respect for human rights. The sort of verbs that tend to collocate with human rights, particularly nowadays, are promotion and protecting. You always hear about promoting and protecting human rights. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think in this declaration, I don't think they use promoting and protecting human rights.
Wait,
Here we have respecting and observing human. Okay, you have the
yeah, there's
promotion
the promotion of the universal
and
respect for.
observance.
Yeah,
It's almost like with time that in English the language has almost changed a little bit.
yeah.
You don't really hear much about observing human rights. It's just an interesting linguistic little nuance. What's that in Chinese?
So the original is 对人权和基本自由的普遍尊重和遵行. I find this 遵行 extremely weird. So this 遵行 is the translation for observance of. But when you say, yeah, it's kind of weird in English. I mean, it's just weird. But maybe in mainland Chinese, I'll say 遵守, slightly more natural, but still a bit weird. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean nowadays when you talk about rights, I mean the most natural collocation to go with is as I say promoting and what was it?
Respect?
Yeah, no,
Respect.
promoting and protecting.
Right,
Promoting
promoting
and
both.
protecting
Yeah.
human rights are the two
Yeah.
that most typically go with it. But we observe, I mean, with observe, you tend to observe procedures, observe protocols, observe
Mm.
immunities, that sort of thing. It's almost like slightly arcane observe. So I quite like it as it were. Okay, let's go down. Okay,
Oh,
so now we
cool.
get to Article 1. So it's always good to remember Article 1. It's pretty short, Article 1. And this first sentence in Article 1 is the important one. Now, here we go. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Now, certainly that very first sentence is one you hear very frequently. All human beings are born
Yeah.
free in dignity and rights. So how's that in the Chinese?
So it's 人人生而自由，在尊严和权利上一律平等. That's the first sentence.
Okay.
And then it's 他们富有理性和良心，并应以兄弟关系的精神相对待. That's the second one.
Okay, there you go. I don't know how politically correct this is anymore.
The brotherhood, right?
I don't know if that would pass this.
Yeah,
Siblinghood.
I
Siblinghood.
or sisterhood. I have no idea. Brotherhood, sisterhood. But is that inclusive enough? Yeah, you could ask that question. Yeah, I was going to comment that this whole Declaration of Human Rights uses the pronoun of he, him, his. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I mean that's with these ones it will, and they'll talk about mankind.
Yeah, it's mankind, not humankind. Yeah.
There won't be humankind. You can use. I think you can use either. Well, if you're, I mean, when you're going, you Chinese interpreters, you're not going to be going into English. That most of your work is going to be into Chinese.
Yeah, then that's not a problem because they all sound the same.
I wouldn't let it bother you too much.
Yeah.
When going with English, I wouldn't let it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't let it give you too many sleepless nights. Let's go on. Okay, now this is again. This is a phrase that sort of gets used quite a bit. Without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political, or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Okay, so Zoe, can you give us that?
Right. 不分种族、肤色、性别、语言、宗教、政治或其他见解、国籍或社会出身、财产、出身或其他身份等任何区別。It's a long list, I have to say. Yeah.
And in the original, is it pretty much? I noticed you haven't really. Do you change it much?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and the word order is more or less the same.
Without distinction of any kind, okay, as opposed to you maybe think maybe without discrimination of any kind, but the actual wording they use in the document is without distinction of any kind. So it's just
right. Isn't that the same?
In the next sentence, furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of blah blah blah. So and again, these are all sort of important identities that again this kind of stuff will get raised. This sort of thing will get quoted a lot in certain meetings, especially in the Human Rights Council.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that the same as in the Charter without distinction of? The list isn't that long, but it's like race, sex, or gender, religion.
In the Charter.
Yeah.
You see, so you're saying it's longer here.
Yeah, it's definitely longer here. I think there's like similar construction in the Charter without distinction of A, B, C, D. I think there are only 4 on the list, something like
Possibly,
that.
Yeah. I think that there's more. There's definitely more here.
Yeah.
Okay, then we go down to Article 3. Okay, this is an important one. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. So again, slightly strange wording to me as a native English speaker. Security of person. So I think if I was to hear it in one of my languages, I don't know, in French, sécurité de la personne, and if I didn't know the declaration, I might be tempted to say human security. But there you go. So you can say just security of person. And how have you done that in the Chinese?
So the Chinese is perfectly normal 人身安全，生命、自由和人身安全。So it's kind of like human security, human body security. Right, actually, human body security, like physical security.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Then we go down to Article 5. Now this is so no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Now this is important because one of the committees, so one of the treaty bodies, as we were talking about, is it tends to be known as the Committee Against Torture, but its full name is the Committee Against Torture or Cruel, or against torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. That's its full name. So you can see it's directly taken from this article of the Declaration. So again, you will hear this kind of treatment mentioned in certain contexts. You'll hear it mentioned a lot. Okay, so it's always good to know in English: cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. or punishment. How is that in Chinese?
Yeah, so the original is 任何人不得加以酷刑或施以残忍的、不人道的或侮辱性的待遇或刑罚。So this translation actually surprised me when I first read it, because it seems to be kind of the opposite of the English. It takes a different perspective. The English is put in the passive, no one shall be subjected to, but the Chinese with 不得加以 is like no one shall apply A, B, and C. Yeah, so I'm not really an expert on Taiwanese Chinese. So my thought is that this 加以 in Taiwanese Chinese can imply passive voice, but it doesn't work in Mandarin, in mainland Chinese. So I would change it to 不得遭受 or 被加以. So change it to the passive. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go on. Okay, so down to Article 7 now. Okay, this is an important concept, I think, in English. This incitement to such discrimination. So this is the whole idea of incitement is used frequently in, incitement to violence, incitement to discrimination, incitement to revolution, whatever. So it's an important word to recognize and to be able to render smoothly. And in the Chinese, it is
煽动这种歧视的行为. So incitement is 煽动. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Article 8. Okay. The right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals. Now, the important word here for me is remedy, especially when you're talking in a legal context, in courts, victims trying to get compensation. So remedy is basically compensation, but you want also some synonyms for remedy. You have the idea of remedy, you have the idea of redress, you have the idea of restitution. I think there may be slight nuances, legally speaking, between those ideas. A remedy is probably the safest one to go for, but so in English, it's good because you have all these R's: remedy, redress, restitution. Okay, then you got compensation as well. How do you do that in Chinese? How do you render remedy?
So remedy is 补救 in Chinese. Yeah. And right to.
Are there some other synonyms that you can give?
I'm not a legal expert, I have to say.
Compensation.
补偿. Compensation, as in, when I hear compensation in English, I will think of money, like monetary compensation.
This is the thing. So remedy doesn't necessarily mean
exactly.
Remedy doesn't necessarily mean money. Compensation does tend to mean money.
Yeah, and in Chinese,
remedy is a bit more general.
Yeah. 补偿.
It's about righting a wrong. All
these
things are about righting a wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like remedy, or in Chinese 补救, is definitely broader, a broader concept, and compensation seems to be one of the remedies.
Yeah, that's a good
maybe, not too sure. Yeah, but compensation is usually 补偿 in Chinese, and 补偿 or 赔偿. 赔偿 is definitely, I would say 99% monetary. Yeah. If it's in a contract, in a legal contract, 赔偿.
Okay.
Yeah. 补偿,
like
maybe.
Redress and remedy are very. I mean, redress is also, it can be just something that you get back, not necessarily money, but just
right.
Of some sort of damages, something that you receive in return for suffering some form of damages. That's an important word.
Damages.
Damages. If you've suffered damages, someone's done something bad to you. Okay, so you're entitled to damages.
Right.
Article 9. Okay, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. How do we have that in Chinese?
So the original is 任何人不得加以任意逮捕、拘禁或放逐. Here we have the be subjected to. So
okay, that's an important.
It's the same
in English
problem.
Also, when you hear How do you say to be subjected to in Chinese?
In this context, I would say 遭受. Yeah, I don't think there's a one-to-one translation for this phrase. It
Okay.
really depends on the context.
So when
Yeah,
you're going into English, it's important to have when you again suffer something, you're subjected to something. The
yeah,
word subjected generates something again bad. So it's
yeah,
important to
yeah.
know that. Arbitrary arrest and detention are pretty much synonyms. You don't and exile.
Mhm.
Okay, let's scroll down. Okay, Article 11. Now, this is some slightly, okay, a penal offence. So for me, what was interesting here is that in 1948, the use of the word uh, penal. So when we are interpreting into English from one of our other languages, especially, for example, from French, okay, they'll talk about un délit pénal, for
Mm.
example, okay? They'll use penal. So as a rule, we'll turn that into criminal. We'll
Criminal.
say nowadays we'll say with a criminal offense, okay, as opposed to uh, again the loi pénale. Okay, we won't say penal law. We're more likely to say criminal law. So this is really to just say as a rule, if you go into English, I would go with the criminal. Criminal sounds better than penal, but it's just interesting that back in the day, 60 years ago, that penal seemed to be
Okay,
the word,
interesting.
the
Yeah,
choice.
I thought because some countries have like penal code. It's not called criminal law, it's
Oh,
a penal
oh
code.
yeah, they do. They
Yeah,
do. Yeah. I mean, you can. What I'm saying, you can use it. Even in Britain, there's a like penal code, but if you go
yeah,
to the UN, we will tend to turn penal into criminal.
criminal.
It's a
Okay,
safer bet. It just sounds a little bit better. I
yeah.
would say. How do you say that in Chinese?
Well, it's the same. It doesn't matter whether it's penal or criminal. I mean, it's the same, and there's just one way of translating that, and that's 刑事. I added 犯罪 to cover the offense because in the original, the translation is kind of like turned the other way around. So you don't need to have 犯罪, so you don't need to translate offense. But if you're just translating this phrase, I say 刑事犯罪. Yeah,
And is
but it
there a
doesn't
so
matter.
in English
Yeah.
also you have a slight difference between an offense and a crime. In Chinese, is there any difference?
Again, I'm not a legal expert. I thought it's kind of the same. So 犯罪, it's crime.
Because
Mm.
like in Russian, I think it's the same word, but like in French, when you're in for French, you have like a délit, you have like délit, infraction, crime. So
Right.
we do tweak it a little bit. For example, if I hear délit, I'll probably say offense. If I say here crime, I'll probably say a crime. So I mean, I was just interested to know in Chinese there was any sort of distinction. There's that word, distinction.
Okay. Um, I don't think so. Really, I think 犯罪 is the word for both.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
more just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a phrase in Chinese called 罪行, but I feel like 罪行 is actually worse than 犯罪. But are you suggesting that offense is actually not that as bad as a crime? Are you suggesting that, or the other way around?
Yes, yes. To my mind, crime is worse than an offense.
Right.
But I wouldn't, as I say, worry about it too much. It's just that I just have that compartmentalization. For example, when I'm working from French, I'll say for daily,
Right.
I'll say an offense, and I'll say for clean a crime. So
Right. I see. I see.
I don't
Yeah.
think it's a big difference. As I say, when I
Yeah.
work with French, I'll make that distinction. Now, the other thing we've got highlighted here, this is a very important concept, certainly in British law, the assumption of innocence. Okay, we say that's generally in English, presumed innocent until proved guilty. So how is that dealt with in Chinese?
Right. So the original translation is slightly longer than I expected. 正式有
Okay.
罪以前，有权被视为无罪. So this is kind of a very literal translation. of the highlighted part. But in Chinese, we usually call it 疑罪从无 or 无罪推定. So there are two ways of saying it in Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is much
Like in
shorter.
English, in fact, so we have like you can say it this way, but a slightly quicker way of saying it is the assumption of innocence.
Yeah. That's kind of the 疑罪从无, the assumption of innocence.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's good to be able to again just recognize the two of them. That's a very important concept.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on. Okay, now so here we have our friend Penal again, held guilty of any penal offence on account of any act or omission. Okay, just first of all, just tell us what give us the Chinese.
Okay. Yeah. So I just took the entire sentence, I think, because it's a bit difficult to just extract the highlighted part. Yeah. 任何人的任何行为或不行为，在其发生时，依国家法或国际法均不构成刑事罪者，不得被判为犯有刑事罪。Yeah. So it's kind of convoluted, I have to say. When I first read it, I was like, what does this even mean? Yeah. But first, from a linguistic point of view, 行为或不行为, so for any act or omission, in mainland Chinese, you'll probably hear 作为或不作为, not 行为或不行为. Yeah.
Okay, this is an important concept, okay, because when they talk about any act or omission, it means the omission bit is important because it generally means like failure to the non-doing of something. Okay, you can't be held guilty for not doing something. Now there are certain cases though where perhaps you can be held guilty for not, like again, this often comes up in like say the Convention Against Torture, and they talk about basically through any act or omission, the failure to act, the failure to stop something happening. And it's often raised in the context of junior, let's say, security officials, junior soldiers, failing to stop or failing to reject the order of a superior. And you get into this whole business of something of a crime called superior orders. What it means is that basically one of these sort of lower ranking official, a lower ranking soldier, he can't claim, if he's performed acts of torture or whatever, he can't claim that he's innocent because he was just following orders. That following orders is not sufficient to constitute an excuse for not stopping an atrocity. That's where that comes up a lot.
Right. Sounds like what Second World War trials.
It all goes back to the Second World War, okay? That's
Yeah.
like the Nuremberg trial.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking of, like Nazi Germany.
Yes, exactly. So you had a lot of these guys, these lower ranking soldiers who were claiming just that their failure to stop something, their omission, it wasn't their fault because they were just following superior orders. And remember that superior orders, or sometimes it's called command responsibility, chain of command. And I believe in Nuremberg they called it was like Befehl ist Befehl. Orders was orders. Befehl ist Befehl. I've never heard anyone say that here. I'd love to hear someone say Befehl ist Befehl. But that's what it was called. Okay, let's move on. So Article 12. So I've highlighted this bit here, attacks upon his honor and reputation. So this is something I've heard come up in meetings. How do we say that in Chinese?
So the original is 荣誉和名誉不得加以攻击. Yeah, I think it's perfectly
and I guess
fine.
This is most linked to, the crimes or the offences of slander and libel most regularly, in the media. And so again, I know in like going from Russian, I've heard this sort of expression used when some individual would be slandered or libeled. So attacks upon his honor and reputation. So again, it's just useful to know that sort of set phrase. Okay, now let's go into number 14. Okay, asylum from persecution. This is an important important concept again in the Declaration. Seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. How do you say that in Chinese?
在其他国家寻求和享受庇护，以避免迫害。
How do you say in Chinese an asylum seeker?
Asylum seeker is 寻求庇护者 in Chinese. Yeah.
Okay.
So I've definitely heard more of like 难民, but then that's refugees. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, to be more
yes,
precise.
so
Yeah.
there is a slight, I think there is a bit of a difference in English.
Yeah.
So again, it's an important one just to when you hear an asylum seeker, to know that technically, that they're fleeing from their home country because of persecution. The idea is that they're in fear of their lives on grounds of whatever political persecution.
Yeah.
Whatever. So I guess they come in the package. You have refugees, asylum seekers, migrants. That's specifically what asylum seekers are. Okay, and then we have paragraph 2 of this article. Acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. This takes us back to the UN Charter, and one of the most important segments of the UN Charter is talking about the purposes and principles. So it's just really to remind you of that. And again, it's just the wording used, acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. How do we say that in Chinese?
违背联合国的宗旨和原则的行为。
Okay, so remember, I'll also put a link. I'm going to put up a little card. I'll put a little card up there. So if you want to go and see the episode that me and Zoe did about the chat, you just have to click there and you can go and you can go and watch that episode. Okay, let's go on. Actually, just go back up. I didn't highlight this. I've just noticed it here. So Article 15, everyone has the right to a nationality. This is worth making and worth noting as well in connection with the concept of stateless persons. You do have people who, for whatever reason, have lost their citizenship of the country of origin, and who don't have they don't have no passport, and they are called stateless persons. And there is a condition of statelessness.
Right.
How do you say that in Chinese?
I guess it's 无国籍, so stateless, or without a nationality.
Yeah.
Yeah. So stateless person.
That gets talked about. I think you had a lot of Russians in the Baltic republics who live in in Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, had problems with this. In the former Soviet republics, had problems with statelessness. So it does come up. It does come up, that idea. So again, it's useful. Make sure you recognize it. Make sure you recognize it, and you actually really do need it. I think also going into English. Think about that.
Yeah.
Raise the issue as well. Okay, go on. Article 60. Okay, the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state. How do we do that?
家庭是天然的和基本的社会单元，并应受社会和国家的保护。
So this is the kind of concept, this is the kind of provision. Okay, always notice the words I use, okay, by the way, provision. So this is one of the provisions of this document that might get cited by, let's say, one of the Islamic countries or one of the Russia or one of the sort of Eastern European countries where the focus, which I guess who are more focused on the family as the main unit of society, more so perhaps than in the West. So here, this sort of embodies one of the sort of maybe the differences in worldview between the Western world and the non-Western world. And this is a provision that could well get cited in justifying a particular law or policy that's being pursued by a certain country. Okay, let's go on. Okay, Article 18. So these are important rights. Okay, right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So how do we do that in Chinese?
思想、良心和宗教自由的权利。
Okay, that's just an important one. You hear that a lot in the news, in meetings. So just remember that. that's similar, is it, to the original? There's not much difference between the Taiwanese and the Mandarin.
No, this is pretty much the same. Yeah.
And again here, Article 19. So there's a whole list of freedoms coming up in these articles. So freedom to hold opinions without interference. How do we do that?
持有主张而不受干涉的自由。
This is a very important one. Right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. So all delegations, in some contexts, rather, will refer to this, and they will not only refer to this. They will often take shots at other countries for measures they take or that their security forces take to restrict those freedoms or to curtail those freedoms. There's a good word for you, to curtail freedoms. Okay, that's a really nice synonym to sort of just restrict all the time. So how do we do that?
和平集会和结社的自由。
Okay, let's go on. All right, Article 22. The economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity. This is his.
Yeah, it's all his.
Women,
it's not. It's a.
I
have no dignity, no freedom of free development of personality.
That's it. And the free development of his personality. Not only do you not have any dignity, you have no personality.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we do all that in Chinese?
Yeah, so for the entire highlighted part, it's 享受他的个人尊严和人格的自由发展所必须的经济、社会和文化方面各种权利。But as we discussed earlier, these economic, social, and cultural rights, a Chinese representative would most likely say 经社文权利 instead of 经济社会和文化权利, which means the Chinese is super duper short, but the English is kind of like 3 times as long as the Chinese. But not great the other way around. Yeah.
The one thing I'd point out here, the economic, social, and cultural, right? This is one of the bundles, one of the 2 bundles of rights that you often get cited together. So on the one hand, you have the economic, social, and cultural rights. In fact, there's a covenant. How do you say a covenant again in Chinese?
It's 公民及政治权利国际公约. So covenant is 公约 here.
Covenant. It's not a treaty. It's not a pact. In French, it's what le pacte. So it's not a pact. It's a covenant. Now the other bundle is civil and political. You have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR.
Right.
How do we say that one?
So that's 公民及政治权利, civil and political rights. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's important to have those 2 again sort of compartmentalized, like economic, social, and cultural on the one hand, civil and political on the other. And then actually this expression at the end of that sentence, the free development of his personality. I've heard this actually used. And the reason I highlight it is because it might seem strange when you hear it in another language, and then you see that it's actually the delegate all along is simply quoting the actual wording of the declaration. So again, don't be alarmed if you hear they use the free development of their personality. It's just good to know, to be ready for if you hear that.
Yeah.
To know what to do with it. Okay, if we go down to Article 23, this is a very important concept. Equal pay for equal work. Okay, so yeah, the idea of equal pay for equal work, which in Chinese is
同工同酬.
Okay, so it's just useful to give you a bit of background to that concept. I'm just quoting here from Wikipedia. The concept of labor rights that individuals in the same workplace be given equal pay. It's most commonly used in the context of sexual discrimination in relation to the gender pay gap. How do you say the gender pay gap in Chinese?
Which is 同工不同酬. So it's it's no equal pay for equal work. Just the Chinese translation. Yeah.
Equal pay relates to the full range of payments and benefits, including basic pay, non-salary payments, bonuses, allowances. Then we say the statement on in international human rights law, the statement on equal pay is the 1951 Equal Remuneration Convention and Convention 100 of the International Labour Organization. So with anything to do with this kind of thing, work rights in the workplace, okay, often you'll get cited, often the International Labour Organization will get cited, the ILO. What is the ILO in Chinese?
I think it's 联合国劳工组织。Yeah, 国际劳工组织。Yeah,
so just
international
aware of that organization. It's like under the UN umbrella, the International Labour Organization, and it does get, as I say, referenced a lot when it comes to rights at the workplace. I know that Convention 169 is a really important one. I can't think off the top of my head what it's about, but I just know it gets Convention 169. Okay, I might put it after when I come to editing. I'll put it in a little box.
Yeah, I'm going to screenshot it.
That's it. Okay, so again, similar wording here. The right to just and favorable remuneration. What's that in Chinese?
有权享受公正和合适的报酬。
Okay, so an important one is the remuneration. Okay, you know, it's a very high register of just basically saying getting paid for your work.
Yeah,
and that is a word you will hear, so you need to be able to recognize it, and at the very least just realize that it means, you know, pay for what you feel for your work. Article 24, again, just a sort of concept again, just to be familiar with the right to see that one of the human rights of is the right to rest and leisure. And what's that in Chinese?
休息和闲暇的权利。
Okay, that's pretty straightforward then, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go down. We're almost there. Okay, some interesting wording here, just to be again familiar with coming from English. Born in or out of wedlock. Okay, so the wedlock just means within a married couple. So born in wedlock means that the child was born to two married parents. Born out of wedlock means that it was born to parents who were not married. So again, how do you say that in Chinese?
婚生或非婚生。I know out of wedlock, you can also say 私生. I'm not too sure if that's kind of formal enough. So maybe I'll just stick to the original.
Yeah, it's very,
Yeah.
it's a very formal expression.
Yeah.
So it's pretty sort of bureaucratic. Well, not even bureaucratic, but it's very high register.
Yeah.
And it's important to know if you hear that word wedlock, you might get a sort of surprise the first time you hear it. So again, just be aware of it. 26 then. So here I've highlighted paragraph 2, full development of the human personality and strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. So what I was saying that, again, we have the use here of the human personality. This is a concept they like, obviously, to refer to in this declaration. So again, just be aware of it. And this strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms is just the real sort of stock language that you want to be comfortable with. Everything. I mean, I know they often, the CRPD, Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and they talk about trying to get disabled kids into sport and trying to get them to be part of, you know, everyday life, to do activities with able-bodied people. Okay. And that often they would talk about full development of the human personality in that context. Okay, just as one example. Okay, let's go down to. Give us that in Chinese.
Yeah, let me give the Chinese version. Yeah, 充分发展人的个性，并加强对人权的和基本自由的尊重。Yeah.
All right, Article 27. Okay. To enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. So you might not have been aware that you had a human right to enjoy the arts. and sharing scientific advancement. And what's just interesting here is actually, I know that now which committee is it? I think it's probably the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. I know they are discussing, they discuss these things called general comments. And I know there's a general comment on the right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress. I can't remember if it's progress or advancement as the actual wording they use. So it's just to show that it's a relevant, it's very much a relevant bit of wording. It's a relevant quote, you know. It's, how do you say it in Chinese?
享受艺术，并分享科学进步及其产生的福利。
Okay, pretty straightforward, yeah?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Go on, and we're almost there. Article 29. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. So again, this is just important wording just to take note of, you know, exercise of rights and freedoms. Another synonym, you know, exercise and enjoyment of, two E's, that's always, you know, as synonyms, you know, if you want to change them up a bit, exercise, enjoy. Contrary again to, and we have our purposes and principles of the United Nations. So how do we do that in Chinese?
这些权利和自由的行使，无论在任何情况下，均不得违背联合国的宗旨和原则。
Okay. It's good also, contrary to, I'll often say, you know, in violation to, in breach of, but there you go. Contrary to is another good way of doing something like that in English, that rendering that concept. And then finally, last but not least, Article 30, it's always good to know the last one, always a big finish. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein. Very legalistic ending to the declaration. How do we have that in Chinese?
本宣言的任何条文不得解释为默许任何国家、集团或个人有权进行任何旨在破坏本宣言所载的任何权利和自由的活动或行为。Yeah.
Okay. I mean, this is again, this delegations will quote this when they're, you know, telling off another delegate, if they, you know, if they're arguing over the wording, over drafting or whatever, and they're saying, you know, nothing, you know, I can imagine the Cubans ticking the Americans off, saying that nothing in the declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person the right to engage, blah, blah, blah. And it's just interesting to look at some of the language used to perform any act, the destruction of any of, to engage in an activity, to perform an act. These are very useful collocations. Destruction of rights and freedoms is to me, it's slightly unusual one, the destruction of rights. I don't know if I've ever talked about the destruction of rights, but there you go. You see, it's written in Article 30. In Chinese, it's pretty straightforward again.
Yeah, it's 破坏. Yeah, it's a bit odd. How to
it's a bit odd as well.
Destroy a right. Yeah.
That word in Chinese is usually used more for destroying, I don't know, buildings.
Like physical things.
Like an
English,
basically.
Yeah.
Yes, it's an unusual one, actually. There you go. Well, there you have it, guys. That is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Hopefully, me and Zoe have now shed a bit of light on that declaration. You'll know that, you know, if you come to working at the UN or if you come to taking an exam or something like that, you'll know sort of which segments of the declaration to focus on and to try and learn. Zoe, any comments from you as we wrap up?
Yeah, I thought this is really useful, like going through important documents or legal instruments of the UN. Yeah, I think it's also helpful for people who don't speak Chinese, because I think you can find all the, I mean, maybe interpreters for other UN languages.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's very important to know which phrases or which parts are often used in English, and you can find the versions, the like official translation in your own language and kind of like match it up. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's hard. But okay, you've got to study those documents. You've got to study
Yeah.
the charter, maybe some of these covenants, maybe the big resolutions. But often you don't know, okay, which bit should I really be focusing on? Which bits am I likely to actually hear
Yeah.
used in live, in a meeting? And that's what sort of, with my now 12 years of experience, I sort of have a fair idea of the bits and pieces that do get quoted. And so hopefully it can help all you guys, you budding interpreters, to sort of negotiate your way through some of these documents. That's the idea. All right, guys. Well, if you've enjoyed the episode, please do smash the like button and do share with your colleagues, friends, fellow students, whatever it may be. Make sure you subscribe. Oh, we've just crossed the 900 barrier. So make sure you subscribe. Visit the website. So we have the website is now up and running. The interpretationstation.org is the website. We have a section dedicated to English and Chinese where I've put together the videos, the episodes that we have done so far, as well as some of the site translations. So that's only going to keep growing. So go take a visit, interpretationstation.org. And that is pretty much all for today's show. Zoe, do you want to say goodbye?
Yeah. Yeah, I should do that in Chinese, right? It's
Do that in Chinese.
kind of our convention. Yeah. 请大家点赞、留言、转发、关注。
Okay, Zoe, could you gavel us out, please?
Yeah, wait, let me pick it up. 口译站第105期到此结束。